Community radio networks, and we are going to get you all the information that you need to take on the day today. It is Saturday, the 27th of January. Let me take a minute here to thank all our sponsors who make community radio networks possible. Huge thanks going out to Discount Power, to Houston EB5, to the Aluwalia Law Offices, to the Wyndham Hotel in Irving, to Digital X-Force, and they have the Cyber Report coming up, and we bring that to you every week, once a week, and it's coming up today right after I get you the world news. Huge thanks going out to Michaelachi as well as their Ruchi Palace. Also to Shri Vimal and their new banquet hall, as well as their Eggaholic restaurant in Irving. And to Mystic Mandala as well as Flash Brush Productions. Thank you very much. You all make community radio networks possible. Let's get you first to hear the world news. This is Community Radio Networks, the world news, read by Shabnam Madgil. The reactions to the top UN court's ruling from yesterday in the Israel-Gaza case were split along the lines of the war raging in the Palestinian territory. The International Court of Justice said Israel must prevent genocidal acts in Gaza and allow humanitarian aid into the besieged strip of land. The war in Gaza started with the October 7th attack by Hamas that resulted in about 1,140 deaths in Israel, mostly civilians. A panel of 17 judges at the Hague-based International Court of Justice ordered Israel to implement a series of measures aimed at averting genocide in the Gaza Strip. The order is part of a wider case brought by South Africa, the UN's highest court, into whether Israel is already committing genocide against Palestinians in Gaza as it fights the war against Hamas. And even though the ruling is not enforceable in the actual legal case as to whether Israel is guilty of genocide is expected to take several years to wend its way through the court, the order is more than just symbolic. It is the International Court of Justice issuing this stunning initial ruling in South Africa's legal challenge to Israel's devastating US-backed military offensive in Gaza, acknowledging that there is a plausible risk of Israel committing genocide there and issuing 6 orders for a change in Israel's conduct as it combats the Gaza-based Palestinian militant group Hamas. And this decision by the chief legal organ of the UN to sustain the case represents a major escalation in international pressure for a change in course by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his chief foreign backer, President Biden. Israel hoped to convince judges to dismiss the case, arguing they lacked jurisdiction and genocide accusations were belied by Israel's approval of limited humanitarian aid for Gaza. The White House called South Africa's accusation unfounded, and the court has ordered Israel to abide by 6 measures. A significant majority of the 17 judges supported imposing each measure, including, in 2 instances, Israel's ad hoc representative on the court. It is the World Court that has ordered Israel to take all measures within its power to prevent acts of genocide in Gaza. South Africa has hailed what it called a decisive victory for the international rule of law after the Court of Justice ruled in favor of its request to impose emergency measures against Israel over its military operations in Gaza. And President Cyril Ramaphosa and the ruling council of South Africa's ruling party erupted in cheers, singing and dancing after the top UN court ordered Israel to prevent possible genocide. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said the charge of genocide leveled against Tel Aviv at the World Court was outrageous and said it would do whatever it necessarily can to defend itself. Saudi Arabia and Qatar welcomed the International Court of Justice ruling, and the Human Rights Watch has urged allies of Israel to secure the company's compliance with the watershed ruling. The UN Security Council will meet next week after this decision by the global body's top court, calling for Israel to prevent genocidal acts in Gaza. Amnesty International has termed the International Court of Justice's decision an important step that could help protect the Palestinian people in the occupied Gaza Strip from further suffering and irreparable harm. The UK has reacted to the IJC's interim ruling by doubling down on London's position that Israel is not committing genocide in Gaza. The UK Labour Party's Foreign Affairs spokesman has called on Israel to fully comply with the ICJ's interim order to take all measures within its power to prevent genocide in Gaza. The European Union has said it wants immediate implementation of the UN court's ruling, and Spain, one of the most critical voices in Europe of Israel's offensive against Hamas, has welcomed this ruling by the UN court. Argentina's right-wing President Javier Milei has said that he will visit Israel in the coming weeks, leaning into a campaign promise that he would cultivate stronger ties with countries such as the U.S. and Israel. At least 26,257 people have been killed in Gaza since the 7th of October, as the number stands today. And Chinese officials reportedly are pressuring Iran to rein in attacks by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels on commercial ships in the Red Sea, or risk harming their business relations with Beijing. A tanker with links to the UK is on fire in the Gulf of Aden this morning after being hit by a missile fired by the Houthis. The Yemeni movement said it targeted the Marlin Luanda in response to American-British aggression. The US and UK have launched airstrikes on Houthi targets in response to these attacks on ships in the Red Sea region. And the Indian Navy's guided missile destroyer INS Vishakhapatnam, deployed in the Gulf of Aden for anti-piracy operations, responded to this distress call from MV Merlin Luanda last night after a fire broke out on board the ship. The MV crew comprises 22 Indians and 1 Bangladeshi, according to the Indian Navy. The U.S. Central Command has reported that its forces struck out this Houthi anti-ship missile as it was being prepared to be launched into the Red Sea on last night. And Hamas says in a statement that Israel is on a campaign of incitement against UN agencies that deliver aid to besieged Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees has said it had opened an investigation into several employees suspected of involvement in the October 7th attacks in Israel, and that it had severe ties with those staff members. The Biden administration announced it was pausing funds for the UN body responsible for Palestinian refugees over allegations that 12 of its staff were involved in Hamas's October 7th attacks against Israel. The White House has said that President Biden spoke with Qatar's Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani about Gaza and efforts to secure the release of hostages taken by Hamas. President Biden's campaign manager traveled to suburban Detroit yesterday, where many Arab Americans are enraged over the administration's Israel policy, and found a number of community leaders unwilling to meet, exposing a growing rift between the White House and key groups often otherwise loyal to Democrats in a critical swing state. President Biden visited Earthrider Brewery in Superior, Wisconsin, touting nearly $5 billion in federal money to upgrade bridges and other infrastructure projects around the country. It's part of the election year push to show that Bidenomics has been a success. 14 million new jobs since I've been president, he declared. 169,000 new jobs in Wisconsin, 200,000 in Minnesota. Joe Biden doesn't need to worry about his prospects in South Carolina's Democratic primary next week. He's got that locked up. He also knows he's not likely to win the solidly red state come November. It hasn't voted for a Democrat since 1976. He's spending this weekend in the state nonetheless, intent on driving home 2 messages. He's loyal to the state that saved his campaign in 2020, and he's determined to win back black voters here and elsewhere who were central to his election last time but are less enthused this go round. He will be the keynote speaker tonight at the state party's fundraising dinner ahead of its first-in-the-nation Democratic primary on the 3rd of February, and he'll stick around to attend a political event at St. John Baptist Church tomorrow in a state where politics and faith are intertwined. White House medical staff have reportedly distributed uppers and downers like candy to Trump administration officials during the former president's time in office. This is a new report from the Department of Defense Inspector General. All phases of the White House medical unit's pharmacy operations had severe and systemic problems due to the unit's reliance on ineffective internal controls to ensure compliance with pharmacy safety standards. The investigation began in 2018 after the Office of Inspector General received complaints about improper medical practices within the White House medical unit and found a slew of compliance issues and improper safety standards. A jury has said that Donald Trump should pay $83.3 million in damages, an eye-popping sum that marks the sharpest legal setback for a former president now entangled in multiple criminal and civil cases while he campaigns for the White House. The verdict was the second time over the past year that a jury has awarded E. Jean Carroll millions of dollars in damages from Trump. She hailed yesterday's decision as a huge defeat for every bully who has tried to keep a woman down. The former president was not present at the verdict as it was read, having departed the Manhattan courthouse. He derided the verdict as absolutely ridiculous. And Vince McMahon, who co-founded the modern WWE in 1982, has resigned as TKO executive chairman and from TKO's board. The 78-year-old McMahon resigned amid a sexual misconduct lawsuit. His departure follows allegations by Janelle Grant, a former employee, accusing him of forced sexual relations and sharing explicit content. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is expected to return to the Pentagon on Monday, nearly a month after being secretly admitted to a hospital for complications with an undisclosed prostate cancer surgery last month. His secrecy surrounding his condition and his first January hospitalization caught the White House and Congress off guard, and even President Biden didn't know that he was hospitalized during much of the first week of January. House Speaker Mike Johnson said that the House will vote on whether to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas as soon as possible, moving forward with punishing the secretary over the administration's handling of the U.S.-Mexico border as early as next week. And Alabama's Attorney General Steve Marshall vowed to continue using nitrogen gas in executions and offered to assist other states interested in the novel method, while fending off concerns that an inmate executed the night before did not become unconscious as quickly as expected and thrashed on the gurney. The execution, the first in the U.S. using nitrogen gas, lasted roughly 30 minutes from the time it started to the time of his death. Nitrogen hypoxia, no longer an untested method, it is a proven one, he said. Texas State Senator Drew Springer has written a letter to the Senate calling to reopen the Senate's impeachment trial into Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Springer says that Paxton is admitting guilt by trying to end the long-running whistleblower lawsuit against him by saying he will no longer contest the facts of the case. Luka had one of the record books last night in Atlanta. He was on full display as he poured a whopping 73 points on 25 of 33, shooting from the floor in the Mavericks' 148-143 win over the Hawks. His 73-point outing marked the 15th time in NBA history a player had scored more than 70 points in a game. Earlier this week, Sixers big man Joel Embiid scored 70 points in Philadelphia's win over the San Antonio Spurs. Almost all of the U.S. Republican governors have signed on a statement backing Texas Governor Greg Abbott in his bitter fight against the federal government over border control. Texas governor is prepared in the unlikely event that President Biden federalizes the National Guard as the standoff over the southern border heats up. This week, the Texas National Guard appeared to ignore a Supreme Court decision approving the removal of the razor wire barriers and continued construction along the border. And Governor Abbott has justified his decision while criticizing Biden for not enforcing immigration laws. President Biden vowed to halt crossings at the border when it's overwhelmed if Congress passes bipartisan immigration legislation giving him that authority. Senate negotiators have agreed to empower the U.S. to significantly restrict illegal migrant crossings at the southern border, and a move that is aimed at ending the migrant surge that has overrun federal authorities over the past several months. The White House said House Republicans have to choose between finding a solution or scoring political points after Speaker Mike Johnson said in a letter to colleagues that the Senate border deal is dead on arrival. A pair of Texas Democrats are calling on Joe Biden to seize control of the Texas National Guard and make it comply with the recent Supreme Court order allowing the president's administration to remove razor wire set up by Texas along the U.S.-Mexico border. And President Biden has announced his readiness to sign the compromise agreed upon a bipartisan group of senators to enhance security along the Mexico border as soon as both Congress chambers approve it. And President Biden has said that the border deal being negotiated in the U.S. Senate was the toughest and fairest set of reforms possible and vowed to shut down the border the day he signs the bill. It is U.S. Senate negotiators agreeing on a deal that significantly restricts illegal migrant crossings at the southern border while also unblocking assistance for Ukraine. Russian leader Putin is sending signals to the U.S. that he is willing to discuss terms terms to end Russia's war against Ukraine. A total of 98 combat clashes took place at the front over the last day, with the largest number on the Avdiivka front. That's 29 clashes there. Ukraine said that Russia had returned the bodies of 77 soldiers days after the crash of a Russian military transport plane threw doubt on the future of such exchanges. Ukraine Defense Forces have eliminated one of the most formidable Russian first-person view drone operators, known by the call sign Moisey or Moses, in the bitter fighting around the Dnipro River. And France has provided Ukraine with 2 additional LRU rocket launchers, the French version of the American M270 multiple launch rocket systems. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen condemned the massive rise in anti-Semitism across Europe in the wake of the Hamas terrorist attacks. And Italy's president denounced the rising anti-Semitism and delivered a powerful speech in support of the Jewish people as he commemorated a Holocaust Remembrance Day overshadowed by Israel's military campaign in Gaza and a rise in anti-Israel acts out there. It is the government of ethnically split Cyprus which promised breakaway Turkish Cypriots a package of measures aimed at winning their trust ahead of a renewed UN attempt to revive long-dormant peace talks. Ukraine has invited Chinese leader Xi Jinping to take part in a global peace summit in Switzerland. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the World News on Community Radio Networks on this Saturday, the 27th of January. And it is at 43 that Rohan Bopanna has become the oldest Grand Slam champion. The Australia Open men's doubles final there with Matthew Ebden. Bopanna and Ebden crowned Australia Open men's doubles champions. India's Rohan Bopanna celebrating becoming the oldest number 1 in men's doubles history by winning the Australian Open with his partner Matthew Ebden this morning. The second seeds claimed a 7-6, 7-5 victory over the unseeded Italian pair Simone Bolelli and Andrea Vavasori on the Rod Laver Arena. It was their maiden title as a team and Bopanna's first in men's doubles after 60 previous Grand Slams, a record for most attempts before winning. The 43-year-old will become the oldest number 1 in men's doubles history when these new rankings are released next week. Ollie Pope struck a defiant century to help England bounce back with a lead of 126 after their batting stutter against a persistent Indian attack in the opening test today. England's second innings reached 316 for 6 at stumps on day 3 in Hyderabad, with Pope and Rehan Ahmed at the crease. India and France have agreed to work together on the joint production of defense equipment, including helicopters and submarines for the Indian Armed Forces and production for friendly countries. The deal was reached during a visit by French President Emmanuel Macron, who met Prime Minister Modi and attended a state banquet hosted by President Draupadi Murmu. French President also yesterday visited the Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia Dargah in South Delhi. The Dargah is the Sufi Saint Khwaja Nizamuddin Aulia and his disciple Amir Khusro's. He enjoyed the Sufi music amidst instrumental melodies during his visit to the mausoleum at the Nizamuddin site in New Delhi. India has registered a single-day rise of 159 new COVID-19 infections, and the count of active cases of the disease stands at 1,623 in the country as of today. The Aam Aadmi Party asserted today that the BJP has purportedly offered 25 crore rupees each to 7 of the MLAs in Delhi to defect from the party, while also allegedly threatening to overthrow the Kejriwal government. Congress asserted that the India bloc is not imploding, even though the BJP is trying its best to do mini implosions in the opposition alliance. The remarks came amid reports that Bihar Chief Minister and JDU leader Nitish Kumar may return to the BJP-led NDA, and it is the political unrest in Bihar that has intensified amid mounting speculation that Nitish Kumar is set to exit the JDU-RJD Congress Grand Alliance and join hands with the BJP yet again. Kerala Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan accused the centre this morning of weakening the democratic system in the country through its attempts to bring constitutional institutions under control. The centre is making moves to hold sway over the constitutional institutions, including the Election Commission, he charged. Pakistan's former ambassador Maliha Lodhi has termed as disappointing the failure of the International Court of Justice to order a ceasefire in Gaza. Pakistan's ambassador to Iran arrived in Tehran while his Iranian counterpart landed in Islamabad, signaling the full restoration of diplomatic relations between the two neighboring countries following a brief disruption in ties after Iran conducted strikes on alleged terrorist targets inside Pakistani territory. And as Ambassador Mudassar Tipu returned to his post in Tehran, he emphasized the importance of a fresh start in bilateral relations. It's time to turn a new leaf in our ties, he remarked. And simultaneously, upon arrival in Islamabad, the Iranian envoy Raza Amiri Mughadam expressed his approval of the swift and effective diplomatic measures taken by both nations in addressing the recent tensions. Pakistan and the Caribbean nation of St. Kitts and Nevis officially established diplomatic relations at a ceremony held at Pakistan's permanent mission to the UN in New York. Ambassador Munir Akram, the country's permanent representative to the UN, and his counterpart signed a joint communique solidifying the diplomatic bond. And Pakistan's first ever audio Nikahnama or marriage certificate service has been launched to provide women access to their matrimonial rights. We do have, after conducting a month-long protest sit-in Islamabad, that the participants of the Turbat Long March, led by Dr. Maharang Baloch, arrived in Quetta, and a crowd of thousands, including students and women, warmly welcomed the marchers near the Balochistan University. Activist Dr. Maharang Baloch lambasted the imposition of Section 144 in Quetta today by the provincial government, calling it an attempt to disrupt and disturb our right to peaceful assembly. After conducting that month-long protest sit-in in Islamabad, the participants of the Turbat Long March, led by Dr. Baloch, had arrived in Quetta with a plan to stage a rally in the provincial capital. And a group of Kohistan clerics, mostly members of the Jamiat Ulema Islam Fazl, issued a fatwa against canvassing by and for women election candidates and declared the act un-Islamic. After failing to meet the legal deadline and missing the timeline it set for itself, the Election Commission issued the final polling scheme for the February 8th general elections. And PMLN Supremo Nawaz Sharif unveiled his party's much-anticipated election manifesto with the upcoming February 8th polls just a few days away. Speaking at a party event in Lahore, he said that the PMLN's manifesto has been prepared with great efforts and would be fully implemented if voted to power. PPP Chairman Bilawal Bhutto Zardari has said that PMLN leaders did not come out of their houses for electioneering thinking they got the match fixed, but the PPP and its allies would jointly hunt the lion with the arrow. Calling his political opponents the dwellers of Rai Wind, Mr. Bhutto Zardari said they did not leave their houses and expected to win the elections without any effort, and told the masses that the only way to stop Nawaz Sharif and his cronies from looting the country was to vote for the PPP. He was speaking at this huge public meeting at the Technology College ground in Multan and thanked the people of Multan for their overwhelming support and promised a new beginning from the 8th of February. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all I have in the world news for you this morning. I do have your Cyber Watch report coming up, and that we bring to you once a week every Saturday, and that's coming up for you next. All right, your CyberWatch report for this week. And we get this to you every week, and it's provided by Digital X-Force, where the cyber intelligence team there curates this list of latest cybersecurity news to keep you informed of stories that matter every week. And so now this week's CyberWatch Top 10 list is a compilation of stories from over 50 relevant news sources across the web, all ranked according to the risk impact. And so I encourage all of you to listen to these stories and take steps to protect your organization. There's been an alarming 198% surge in browser-based phishing attacks, evasive attacks up to 206% in H2 of 2023. In this stark revelation, a recent Menlo security report has unveiled a staggering 198% surge in browser-based phishing attacks during the latter half of 2023 compared to the first half of the year. Delving into evasive threats, the study showcases a concerning 206% increase in constituting 30% of all browser-based phishing attacks. Evasive tactics, including SMS phishing, which is called smishing, adversary in the middle, AITM frameworks, image-based phishing, brand impersonation, and multi-factor authentication bypass demonstrate an evolving sophistication among cyber threat actors. The report underscores the prevalence of over 550,000 browser-based phishing attacks in the past 12 months, with the legacy reputation URL evasion attacks witnessing a significant 70% uptick since 2022. Of particular concern is the revelation that more than 73% of lure attacks originate from seemingly trustworthy websites, exposing the intricacies of these attacks. The SEC is confirming a SIM swap hack for recent Twitter account hijacks. In this recent cybersecurity incident, the U.S. SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, confirmed a SIM swapping attack as the cause of the hijacking of its official Twitter account. Hackers took advantage of the compromised account to falsely announce the approval of Bitcoin futures exchange-traded funds. This misinformation triggered a temporary surge in Bitcoin's value, followed by a drop when the SEC corrected the announcement. The SEC revealed that multi-factor authentication, a critical security measure, has been disabled on the account for several months, enabling the attackers to reset the password once they gained control of the phone number via the telecom carrier. SIM swapping involves redirecting calls and text to a rogue device, for allowing the cyber criminals to intercept verification codes and compromise accounts. And despite the breach, the SEC emphasized that there was no evidence of unauthorized access to its systems, data, devices, or other social media accounts. Law enforcement, including the FBI and the CISA, is actively investigating this incident, focusing on the methods used by the attackers to convince the carrier to change the SIM and identify the associated phone number. The UK Cybersecurity Agency is warning of an AI-driven surge in ransomware attacks, and that would be happening by the year 2025. The UK's National Cybersecurity Centre issuing this sobering forecast, predicting a surge of ransomware attacks propelled by AI advancements. In this comprehensive report, it underscores the current utilization of AI by threat actors, particularly in refining cyber operations like reconnaissance, phishing, and coding. The agency anticipates this trend persisting and escalating beyond 2025. Notably, the report emphasizes the imminent role of AI in optimizing phishing attacks, a critical initial step for cyber criminals orchestrating ransomware campaigns. Now, this analysis by UK Cybersecurity Agency extends to the aftermath of attacks, expressing concerns about AI's potential to accelerate the analysis of exfiltrated data. This enhanced efficiency enables threat actors to train AI models swiftly, intensifying the impact of cyber attacks, including ransomware. And the report serves as a crucial warning for the cybersecurity community, urging proactive measures to counteract evolving threats in AI-driven landscapes. The cryptocurrency theft has dropped to $1.7 billion last year, but the hacks proliferate. The cryptocurrency Wild West continues, albeit with fewer bank robberies. According to blockchain analysis firm Chainer Analysis, the total value of cryptocurrency stolen by hackers decreased significantly to $1.7 billion last year. However, hack incidents actually increased, and that happened and that happened as this increase last year. Now, let me tell you, these hack incidents actually increased to over 230, indicating ongoing vulnerabilities, and the decline is attributed to a fewer decentralized finance, that's DeFi protocol mega heists compared to prior years. DeFi hacks fueled massive theft spikes in 21 and 22, but then they dropped 64% last year to 1.1 billion. Yet hackers are clearly becoming more sophisticated, even as platforms step up security efforts. North Korean state-sponsored groups who fund weapons programs with stolen crypto have pulled off 20 major hacks last year, more than 22, and their haul did more than the year 22. Their haul dropped from 1.7 billion to over 1 billion, but the threat remains serious. Major exchange breaches still resulted in hundreds of millions in losses, including at Euler Finance, Mixin Network, and Kyber Network. However, prompt action by targeted platforms aided recovery and law enforcement seizures. The spyware firm NSO is attempting image rehab through lobbying and PR. Israel-based spyware company NSO Group desperately trying to salvage its reputation and reverse U.S. sanctions. And according to this recent report, NSO, developer of the notorious Pegasus spyware, used to target thousands worldwide, has faced intense backlash since 2021. Revelations about Pegasus enabling surveillance of journalists, activists, and politicians. In response, NSO has gone on a massive lobbying and public relations offensive, spending millions of dollars on DC consultants and law firms. It recently published a new transparency report portraying itself as a defender of human rights. However, experts remain highly skeptical of NSO's claims and motives. They see the reports as more spin than substance. And with its business prospects constrained by U.S. blacklisting, NSO is aggressively pitching officials on the security necessity of its spyware, particularly for Israel. But the Biden administration seems unmoved so far. The spyware firm's credibility on human rights continues to suffer from Pegasus' dark legacy of enabling serial abuse and intrusive surveillance. Despite the lobbying blitz, NSO still faces an uphill battle to rehabilitate its battered image and reverse American sanctions. Its latest transparency report appears to be more smoke and mirrors than meaningful reform. 750 million Indian phone numbers are for sale on the dark web. Two threat actors, Cyber Devil and Unit 8200, affiliates of the Cyber Crew Group, have advertised a colossal 1.8 terabyte database with 750 million Indian phone numbers. Cybersecurity firm Cloud SEK discovered the database, which allegedly includes names, addresses, and Aadhaar details. Priced at $3,000, the data set affects major Indian telecom providers, impacting over half the country's population. Cloud SEK's analysis reveals a comprehensive breach across the telecom sector. The threat actors deny direct involvement, claiming acquisition through undisclosed work within law enforcement channels. The Cyber Crew, emerging in July last year, has quickly become active in major breaches across various sectors, and this incident in India raises concerns about the compromise of sensitive personal information and underscores the evolving tactics of cyber criminal groups targeting large databases for financial gain or other malicious purposes. And then Russian hackers are breaching Microsoft executives' emails. Nobelium Group is striking again. Microsoft revealed in a regulatory filing that the Russian hacking group Nobelium is linked to the 2020 SolarWinds breach, accessed email accounts of some top executives. The attack, detected last week, targeted a legacy of non-production test tenant accounts, escalating to compromise a small percentage of corporate email accounts, including senior leadership members. Microsoft clarified that there's no evidence of customer data, production systems, or proprietary source code access. The disclosure aligns with new U.S. cybersecurity incidents, reporting rules emphasizing transparency amid heightened global tensions. And while Microsoft downplayed material impact, it underscores the risks during geopolitical conflicts. Nobelium, also known as APT-29 or Cozy Bear, has historical ties to Russian intelligence and played a pivotal role in major cyber intrusions, including the SolarWinds compromise. Microsoft faced criticism, with Senator Ron Wyden citing negligence and urging a re-evaluation of government dependence on Microsoft. The FBI is actively involved in addressing this incident, while Microsoft continues its investigation, pledging further actions based on findings. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your cyber report that is brought to you every week by Digital X-Force, headed by Mr. Lalit Ahluwalia. And continuing with the other details of this report for this week, there's a Cozy Bear nation-state hackers breaching HPE's email system in this ongoing cyber espionage campaign. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise confronted a breach by the notorious nation-state actor Cozy Bear that was discovered on the 12th of December last month. The breach targeted HPE's cloud-based email system and posed critical questions about the extent of the damage and future data security. Cozy Bear, also known as Midnight Blizzard, had potentially been infiltrating HPE's system since May last year, extracting data from specific mailboxes, including those within the cybersecurity department. Now, this alarming revelation followed a previous intrusion in June last year involving compromised SharePoint files. Responding decisively, HP swiftly mobilized its cybersecurity forces and collaborated with external experts. The company is actively cooperating with law enforcement agencies to trace the perpetrators and is assessing regulatory notifications to ensure transparency and compliance. And while the immediate financial and operational impacts seem limited, the incident underscores the ongoing challenges that organizations face against sophisticated nation-state cyber threats. An alarming surge in discussions on illicit use of ChatGPT and AI. Security researchers from Kaspersky's Digital Footprint Intelligence Service have detected a substantial increase in dark web discussions related to the unlawful exploitation of large language models, particularly ChatGPT. Through last year, nearly 3,000 dark web posts have surfaced covering a spectrum of cyber threats, from the creation of malicious chatbots to the exploration of alternative LLM projects like XXX-GPT and Fraud GPT. Now, the peak in discussions observed in March of the previous year indicates a sustained interest among cyber criminals in leveraging AI technologies for illicit purposes. Kaspersky's data reveals that threat actors are actively exploring various schemes, including the development of malware and the unauthorized use of language models for processing stolen user data and parsing files from compromised devices. Digital footprint analyst Alisa Kulishenko emphasizes the integration of automated responses from ChatGPT or its equivalents into cyber criminal forums, showcasing the increasing prevalence of AI tools in nefarious activities. Now, additionally, threat actors are sharing jailbreaks through dark web channels, unlocking additional functionalities and finding ways to exploit legitimate tools, such as those used in penetration testing for malicious purposes. Veolia North America is facing a ransomware attack on internal systems. Critical water operations though unaffected. It is Veolia North America, a prominent water management company, that fell victim to this ransomware attack targeting its internal back-end systems. The attack prompted Veolia to take swift defensive action, temporarily taking affected systems offline until restoration could be completed. And while the incident resulted in temporary disruptions to online bill payment systems, the company assures customers that payments made during this period have been properly applied and late fees or interest charges will not be incurred. Crucially, Veolia emphasizes that the ransomware attack did not extend to impact its water or wastewater treatment operations, assuring the public of the security and integrity of critical infrastructure. The incident serves as a stark reminder of the persistent threat posed by ransomware to organizations across sectors. Veolia's proactive response and commitment to customer transparency underscores the importance of robust cybersecurity measures to mitigate risks and to ensure the continuity of essential services. So these, ladies and gentlemen, were some of the details of this week's cyber report. And it is at Digital X-Force that the cyber intelligence team there curates this list of latest cybersecurity news to keep each one of you informed of these stories that matter every week. And we bring it to you every Saturday morning. These list of compilations of stories from over 50 relevant news sources across the web, all ranked according to the risk impact. And we hope that you found these very useful. So that concludes your cyber report. I do have one last segment of today's show coming up for you next. represents a major escalation in international pressure. I do have some stories from the annals of history that happened on today's date as we get you all this information ready to take on the day. And that is Saturday, the 27th of January today. But before I get you all those very interesting stories for particularly all you history buffs, I do have some huge thanks going out to those that support community radio networks and make it possible for all this information to get to you every day. It is Mr. Malik Jamal with Discount Power. I also would like to thank Mr. Pradeep Kumar with the Houston EB5, Attorney Pallavi Aluwalia with the Aluwalia Law Offices. We have the Wyndham Hotel in Irving with their banquet halls that also supports community radio networks. And Digital X-Force, Mr. Lalit Aluwalia, you just heard the cyber report that we get to you every week that is provided by his team. Attorney Kimberly Kinzer with kinzerlaw.com. Also the Michael Archie restaurant, and they have two locations now. One location is their original one in Plano, and the second one now is the Ruchi Palace in Carrollton that also has a banquet hall. Also, Sri Vimal is getting a new banquet hall ready for you in Irving, right where their store is out there. They also have a restaurant called Eggholic, which is on MacArthur and 635. Huge thanks going out to Mystic Mandala as well as to Flash Brush Productions for their support of community radio networks. All right, let's get you some stories now from the annals of history that happened on today's date, which is the 27th of January. In 1888, the National Geographic Society is incorporated in Washington, D.C. for the increase and diffusion of geographical knowledge. The 33 men who originally met and formed the National Geographic Society were a diverse group of geographers, explorers, teachers, lawyers, cartographers, military officers, and financiers. All shared an interest in scientific and geographical knowledge, as well as an opinion that in a time of discovery, invention, change, and mass communication, Americans were becoming more curious about the world around them. And with this in mind, the men drafted this constitution and elected as the Society's president a lawyer and philanthropist named Gardiner Green Hubbard. Neither a scientist nor a geographer. It is Hubbard who represented the Society's desire to reach out to the layman. 9 months after its inception, the Society published its first issue of the National Geographic magazine. For those that are familiar with that, you know it is, that magazine is a favorite of thousands. Readership that time did not grow, however, until Gilbert Grosvenor took over as editor in 1899. In only a few years, Grosvenor boosted circulation from 1,000 to 2 million by discarding the magazine's format of short, overly technical articles for articles of general interest accompanied by photographs. National Geographic quickly became known for its very stunning and pioneering photography, being the first to print natural color photos of sky, sea, and the North and South Poles. And the Society used its revenues from the magazine to sponsor expeditions and research projects that further the humanity's understanding of natural phenomena. In this role, the National Geographic Society has been instrumental in making possible some of the great achievements in exploration and science to date, and it has given out more than 1,400 grants funding that helped Robert Peary journey to the North Pole, Richard Byrd fly over the South Pole, Jacques Cousteau delve into the sea, and Jane Goodall observe wild chimpanzees, among many other projects. And today, ladies and gentlemen, the National Geographic Society is one of the world's largest non-profit scientific and educational institutions. The Society sees itself as a guardian of the planet's natural resources, and in this capacity focuses on ways to broaden its reach and educate its readers about the unique relationship that humans have with the Earth. It was on the 27th of January in 1943 that the 8th Air Force bombers dispatched from their bases in England fly the first American bombing raid against the Germans, targeting the Wilhelmshaven port. Of 64 planes participating in the raid, 53 reached their target and managed to shoot down 22 German planes and lost only 3 planes in return. The 8th Air Force was activated in 1942, the year before, as a heavy bombers force based in England, and its B-17 Flying Fortresses capable of sustaining heavy damage while continuing to fly, and its B-24 Liberators long-range bombers became famous for precision bombing raids. And this is the first time that the Americans bombed the Germans on today's date in 1943. And on that same day, in that same year, Future President Ronald Reagan, an Army Air Corps first lieutenant during World War II, is on active duty assignment with the Army's first motion picture unit. Technically, he was a unit PR officer. However, Warner Brothers Studios and the American Army Air Corps had tapped him the previous year to star in a motion picture called Air Force. To allow filming to go forward, Ronald Reagan was transferred from his cavalry unit to the Air Corps' motion picture unit in early January 1943. Housed in the old Hal Roach Studios, the first motion picture unit produced military training, morale, and propaganda films to aid the war effort. And that was the first time that he served there in that film unit on today's date in 1943. On the 27th of January in 1944, Soviet forces permanently break the Leningrad siege line, ending the almost 900-day German enforced containment of the city, which cost hundreds of thousands of Russian lives. The siege began officially on the 8th of September in 1941, and the people of Leningrad began building anti-tank fortifications and succeeded in creating a stable defense of the city. But as a result, they were cut off from all access to vital resources in the Soviet interior. Moscow specifically. And then in 1942, an estimated 650,000 Leningrad citizens perished from starvation, disease, exposure, and injuries suffered from continual German artillery bombardment. So that siege of Leningrad is lifted on today's date in 1944. The Soviet defenses had punctured the siege, ruptured the German encirclement, and allowed more supplies to come in along Lake Ladoga, and the siege officially ended after 872 days, though it is often called the 900-day siege, after a Soviet counteroffensive pushed the Germans westwards. And on today's date, the 27th of January in 1945, Soviet troops enter Auschwitz in Poland, freeing the survivors of the network of concentration camps and finally revealing to the world the depth of the horrors that perpetrated there. Auschwitz was really a group of camps designated as 1, 2, and 3, and there were also 40 smaller satellite camps. It was at Auschwitz II at Birkenau that was established in 1941 that the SS created a complex, monstrously orchestrated killing ground. 300 prison barracks, 4 bathhouses in which prisoners were gassed, corpse cellars, and cremating ovens. Thousands of prisoners were also used for medical experiments overseen and performed by the camp doctor Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death. On today's date, in 1945, is when Soviet troops entered Auschwitz in Poland. The Red Army had been advancing deeper into Poland since the middle of January, but having liberated Warsaw and Krakow, Soviet troops headed to Auschwitz. In anticipation of the Soviet arrival, the officers began this murder spree in the camps, shooting sick prisoners and blowing up crematoria in a desperate attempt to destroy the evidence of their crimes. And when the Red Army finally broke through, Soviet soldiers encountered 648 corpses and more than 7,000 starving camp survivors. There were also 6 storehouses filled with hundreds of thousands of women's dresses, men's suits and shoes that the Germans did not have time to burn. Forcefully making the continued importance of the West in the development of nuclear weaponry, the government detonates the first of a series of nuclear bombs at its new Nevada test site on today's date in 1951. And it was, although much of the West had long lagged behind the rest of the nation in technological and industrial development, the massive World War II project to build the first atomic bomb single-handedly pushed the region into the 20th century. And the government continued to conduct atmospheric tests for 6 more years at this Nevada site. On the 27th of January in 1965, the Shelby GT350, a version of a Ford Mustang sports car developed by the American auto racer and car designer Carroll Shelby, is launched. The Shelby GT350, which featured a 306 horsepower V8 engine, remained in production through the end of the 1960s and today is a valuable collector's item. Carroll Shelby, born in Texas, and gained fame in the racing world in the 50s, and among his accomplishments was the victory at the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1959, making him just the second American ever to win that iconic endurance race. And by the 60s, Shelby had retired from racing for health reasons and was designing high-performance cars and became known for his race cars, including the Cobra and the Ford GT40, as well as such muscle cars as the Shelby GT350. And according to the New York Times, in the 60s, at the apex of the Southern California car efflorescence, his name was synonymous with muscle cars, relatively small vehicles with big beefy engines, an era that many car buffs consider Detroit's golden age, and Mr. Shelby was arguably its prime mover. The Shelby GT350, an iteration of the first Ford Mustang, which was officially unveiled by Henry Ford II at the World's Fair in Flushing Meadows, New York in 1964. On that same day, the new car was also debuted in Ford showrooms across America, and almost 22,000 Mustangs were immediately snapped up by buyers. Named for a World War II fighter plane, the Ford Mustang had a long hood and a short rear deck, and more than 400,000 sold within its first year of production, far exceeding sales expectations. So it was on today's date that the Shelby GT350, that version of the Ford Mustang sports car, was developed by the American auto racer and car designer Carroll Shelby. And in 2003, The Times quoted comedian Jay Leno, an avid car collector who has owned several Shelby cars, as saying, "Carroll is sort of like the car world's Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays. Unlike so many racers, he didn't come from a rich family, so he signifies that every man common sense ideal. When I was a kid, American cars were big chunky things, and until Carroll used his ingenuity to make them compete with European cars, he was a populist, the kind of guy that other car buffs could emulate." And then a launch pad fire during Apollo program tests at Cape Canaveral in Florida on today's date in 1967 kills astronauts Virgil Gus Grissom, Edward H. White II, and Roger Chaffee. An investigation indicated that a faulty electrical wire inside the Apollo 1 command module was the probable cause of that fire, and the astronauts, the first Americans to die in a spacecraft, had been participating in a simulation of the Apollo 1 launch scheduled for the next month. The Apollo program that was initiated by NASA following President Kennedy's 61 declaration of the goal of landing men on the moon and bringing them back safely to Earth by the end of the decade. The so-called moonshot was the largest scientific and technological undertaking in history, and it was the first manned spacecraft to travel to the moon. And in 1969, astronauts Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin walked on the lunar surface. In all, there were 17 Apollo missions and 6 lunar landings. And then, ladies and gentlemen, on today's date in the year 1970, I wrote it for breakfast, recorded it for lunch, and we are putting it out for dinner. That's the way John Lennon told the story of Instant Karma, one of his most memorable songs as a solo artist and the third Lennon single to appear before the official breakup of the Beatles. The only exaggeration in John's description was the part about dinner. Instant Karma wasn't actually released to the public until 13 days after it was written and recorded over the course of a single Tuesday on the 27th of January, today's date, in the year 1970. And by any measure, it was one of the fastest pop songs ever to come to market. Instant Karma came during a tumultuous time for John Lennon personally and for the band he was in the midst of leaving behind. The Beatles had spent the better part of 1969 trying to decide whether or not they were still a band, abandoning recording sessions that had just begun and cancelling plans for their first live performances in more than 3 years. The material for both of the band's last 2 albums, Abbey Road and Let It Be, was recorded that year. But Let It Be sat unreleased and without an agreed-upon producer. Lennon, meanwhile, was moving in a new direction. Give Peace a Chance, recorded during the famous 1969 Berlin, had already come out under the name The Plastic Ono Band, as had Cold Turkey, his wrenching account of kicking heroin that same year. By January 1970, John Lennon had walked away from the Beatles, and the Plastic Ono Band was the only musical entity he considered himself part of. And on today's date, that session came about spontaneously. He wrote the song that morning, and as he said, "I knew I had a hit record." What got the record finished that same day and gave it its incredible sound, however, was the unexpected appearance of Phil Spector that evening in the EMI studios. After several run-throughs under Spector's direction, John Lennon said, "Suddenly we went into the room and heard what he'd done to it. It was fantastic. Sounded like there was 50 people playing." John's happiness with these results would lead directly to Spector's taking over the dormant Let It Be project, a development that ended up driving a further wedge between John Lennon and Paul McCartney prior to the official breakup of the Beatles. But today's date in 1970, when John Lennon wrote it for breakfast, recorded it for lunch, and we're putting it out for dinner, and that's the way he told the story of Instant Karma, one of his most memorable songs as a solo artist. The US, South Vietnam, the Viet Cong, and North Vietnam formally signed an agreement ending the war and restoring peace in Vietnam on today's date, the 27th of January, 1973. And this agreement ending the war and restoring peace in Vietnam was signed in Paris. Due to South Vietnam's unwillingness to recognize the Viet Cong's provisional revolutionary government, all references to it were confirmed to a two-party version of the document signed by North Vietnam and the US, and South Vietnamese were presented with a separate document that did not make reference to the Viet Cong government. And this was part of Saigon's long-time refusal to recognize the Viet Cong as a legitimate participant in the discussions to end the war, and the settlement included a ceasefire throughout Vietnam. In addition, the U.S. agreed to the withdrawal of all U.S. troops and advisors, totaling about 23,700, and the dismantling of all U.S. bases within 60 days. In return, the North Vietnamese agreed to release all U.S. and other prisoners of war. This happened on today's date in 1973, when both sides agreed to the withdrawal of all foreign troops from Laos and Cambodia, and the prohibition of bases in and troop movements through these countries. And the last U.S. serviceman to die in combat in Vietnam was Lieutenant Colonel William Nolte, who was killed by an artillery shell northwest of Saigon only 11 hours before this truce went into effect. And in one of the last stories I have for today's date, it was on the 27th of January 1993 that American Chad Rowan becomes the first non-Japanese sumo wrestler to become a yokozuna, the sport's highest rank. The 23-year-old Hawaii native, who stands 6 feet 8 inches and weighs 455 pounds, is the 64th person to hold the top rank in sumo, Japan's national sport. He went by his sumo name, Akabono, which means sunrise or dawn, was unnaturally tall for a sumo wrestler, but extremely long and athletic. And despite only playing high school football in his senior years, he earned a basketball scholarship to Hawaii Pacific University. However, he quit basketball and dropped out of college to pursue a career in sumo wrestling. Using his long reach, he perfected a thrusting style, generating enormous force, enough to send opponents flying out of the ring. After breezing through the lower divisions and setting records along the way, he joined the senior division in the year 1990. And in 92, he won 2 tournament championships. After winning a second consecutive championship in early 93, he was promoted to yokozuna. He went on to win 4 of the next 8 championships before injuries slowed him. Initially faced skepticism about his promotion. "I don't have any complaints about this ability," said the former Grand Champion Selection Committee, "but I don't feel good about this." In response to the criticism, he simply said, "I'll do my best to train well and fulfill everyone's expectations." When he retired in 2001, he was 6th on the all-time list with 11 championships. And that was American Chad Rowan, who became the first non-Japanese sumo wrestler to become a yokozuna on today's date in 1993. Those were some of the stories from the annals of history that happened on the 27th of January, and I do hope you found them very interesting. We'll end our show here. You have all the information now to go take on the day today. It is Saturday, the 27th of January, and we hope to see you all at the India Day celebrations for the 75th Republic Day of India. And those are happening today, starting at 11 o'clock at the SLPS Community Center, and that is in Irving. Brought to you by the India Association of North Texas, and you can check out the website int.org for more information.